So sorry if that seemed a little frazzled and disorganized. Our Deputy Secretary of Education literally just came in on 2 wheels, I think. But she's here, so.
I will share.
So we're all good now. Okay. So I want to first of all thank NYSET for collaborating on this with us. I have a little thing of a bunch of thank yous that I need to do, but NYSET's Jamie Safone is the Executive Vice President of NYSET, and she wants to say a few words with you all, and then we'll introduce Kylie King, and we'll talk about the data that we did fresh off the printer, and then we'll get into the panel discussion, which I'm guessing is what most of you probably came here for. So I'll give this to Jamie.
Thank you, Colleen. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm thrilled to be back in the North Country, and especially here at this event with all of you. As some of you may already know, NYSET supports a statewide law or policy requiring a bell-to-bell restriction on the use of cell phones in classrooms and in schools. That's beginning of the day bell to end of the day bell. And this is so that our students can remain fully engaged in both their educational experiences, but also their social interactions with peers. As educators, we strive to cultivate a classroom culture that fosters curiosity, inquiry, connectedness, and authentic learning. We have heard continuously from our members that cell phones are a distraction to all of this. And our members spend a lot of time being the cell phone police. We know that educators' primary responsibility is to educate and foster that love of learning for each and every one of our students. And so they shouldn't be bearing the role or the sole responsibility for the enforcement of cell phone policies in isolation. So the restrictions that NYSET are advocating for should be designed locally with input from parents and educators, unions, and all other stakeholders. And that's why events like this are crucial. They're being held across the entire state because of the essential conversations that start here. So I thank everyone that organized and contributed to having this event. And I thank all of you for coming here, making the time and space to be part of this conversation that is just beginning tonight or continuing tonight. We're not going to be able to solve it tonight, but we are certainly going to dive deep into the reasons behind all of this. So thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to hearing from our esteemed panelists. Thanks, everyone.
So once again, thanks everyone for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Lenza. I'm a professor here at SUNY Plattsburgh, but more importantly, I'm a mom to twin 21-year-old girls and a 23-year-old son, and an advisor, mentor to hundreds of college students over the years. So 18 years ago, about 18 years ago, before kids had phones or social media, Shine On began on the floor of my office out of desperation. In kindergarten, my twin daughters were already discovering how vicious girls could be to each other, and what happened when you didn't have the right clothes or the right shoes, or you weren't allowed to sit at the popular kids' table at the cafeteria that day. So I decided we needed to make girls confident enough to not care what the Queen Bee said. Creating strong girls at a very young age would help get them over a lifetime of emotional hurdles instead of succumbing to social anxiety, depression, eating disorders, that whole host of other negative mental health issues. So that's what we did. I had some awesome, strong college students that helped me create Shine On, and we had lots of help along the way. Some of the moms and teachers are in the room now. I didn't do this alone, and I still don't continue to do it alone. It's a group effort. But it's morphed into a program 18 years later that now serves girls and boys and it's free in classrooms throughout northern New York, and it actually is aligned and helps to teach the New York State social emotional learning curriculum. So that's where Shine On has jumped to now. So here we are facing the statistics and the mental health concerns that we never thought possible years ago. Countless studies have proven that phones, specifically social media, have altered our children and not necessarily for the better. If you ask any parent or teacher, they can tell you that kids and young adults have lost the ability to think critically, to focus, to communicate in person. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and all of that has increased since that first little like button appeared in 2010. Constant comparison, FOMO, which my students taught me what that was, increased isolation, even though they have thousands of friends on Instagram, have negatively impacted an entire generation. We know the platforms are designed to be addictive, using algorithms based on preferences to continue to keep people engaged and online for as long as possible. It's a business model, and it involves collecting and selling user data for targeted advertising. As someone who spent a decade or more, a little more over a decade, doing marketing and public relations in my earlier career, I'm kind of ashamed by that. We know all of it. We're not really here to talk about how bad things are, but now is the time to do something about it. Addicted children aren't able to moderate themselves, so this is when common sense regulations must intercede. Countries throughout Europe, Australia, Japan, China, and many others have already established laws around social media and phone usage in schools, some even years ago. To quote Lizzo, it's about damn time. We need to do something about it here in the United States. So I want to personally thank Governor Hochul for having the leadership and the spine to take the brunt of the heat in order to protect our children. So for those of you who are unsure, or if this is even necessary, or if you're even wondering how this is going to work, thank you for coming to listen and to learn. To our panel of experts, thank you for taking the time to advocate on behalf of our young people. And to Tom, thank you for everything you do in our area. The North Country is a better place with you here. And speaking of Tom, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tom Halleck. Tom is senior producer and host of Mountain Lake PBS's weekly news and public affairs program, Mountain Lake Journal. He has won multiple Associated Press and Edward R. Murrow Awards. He's been nominated for a regional New England Emmy Award. We are so fortunate to have Tom with us tonight. He is by far the most honest, knowledgeable, and hardworking journalist the North Country has ever seen, and we are so lucky he has chosen the Champlain Valley as home. Tom, thank you. So a couple of details. I wanted to take a hot second to tell everyone how you can ask questions of the panelists tonight. You all received, or should have hopefully received, note cards and a pen when you came in. So if you'd like to ask a question, please write a short, succinct question on your note card. Send your cards in toward the aisle to the center row, and we'll collect them all. We'll sort through them and sort of put them into categories to try to answer at least one from every category. Also, we have prizes. Bend over. It looks fine on the hanger. It's not quite long enough. We have prizes. So we have some books as giveaways. If you put your name on the back of a card, and we will pick the cards at random, I have 5 copies of The Anxious Generation, which has really kind of started the ball rolling about a year ago. This isn't new. We've had mental health issues with phones and social media for a while now, but for whatever reason, thank you to Jonathan Haidt. And we also have 13 Things Strong Kids Do. So I have books as giveaways. So just stick your name on the back and we'll draw those. The first part of our program is intended to release the preliminary data from the survey we just finished conducting. As many of you know, we conducted a research survey about what North Country parents think regarding their children's phone and social media habits. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kylie King. Kylie is a data goddess. You can come up here. No, come on. She's a data goddess, and she's taking the lead on helping to slice and dice the data, and we're starting to compare it to national data to see how the North Country compares. So I'd like to thank her for all of her help. I don't do anything alone. Dr. Kylie King directs the Office of Institutional Effectiveness at SUNY Plattsburgh, where she promotes a culture of data-informed decision-making and transparency. Dr. King conducts research in the areas of social network analysis, individual, team, and organizational measurement. She serves as a faculty affiliate at several other universities. She's really smart. Kylie earned her PhD in measurement, statistics, and evaluation from the University of Maryland at College Park. So you all should have the data sheets. Does anyone not have the data sheet? Everyone's got one? Okay, so that is what Kylie is going to go over. So we'll take questions about any of the data afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'll just take a couple of minutes to walk through some of the information that you're looking at on the sheet titled Digital Behavior in Children and Teens. I'm happy to answer questions about the methods behind the analysis, any of the information that you see presented. But really, this survey was put together by Colleen and by myself to get a better understanding of how children and young adults in our region are comparing to the national averages, as well as how parent perceptions and behaviors compare to what we're seeing nationally. And so what we're finding generally are a lot of consistencies with some important differences that I'll highlight for you. So the first section just overviews the participants who took part in the survey. So the survey has been open for about 2 months, and it is actually still open if you are interested in providing input. But this provides a snapshot when we had 661 respondents. So the average family income of those respondents is similar to the estimated income of families in the region. However, I'll note that the educational attainment of respondents is a bit higher than in the North Country region. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as you consider the findings of this in context with what might be happening in the North Country more broadly. So we started by asking about phone ownership and social media use. According to our survey respondents, around age 11 is when children, young adults are first receiving their cell phones, and that's similar to the national average, which is about 12 years old. Interestingly, perhaps, parents with higher income and more education report less phone use and less social media use, as well as more monitoring of social media usage. And they're more likely to wait longer before giving their children the phones for the first time. The goal for sharing all of this information is not to pass judgment, but just to spread awareness about how this problem is impacting families and if it might be differentially impacting families in our region. Interestingly, in our survey, most parents report their children use social media for fewer than 2 hours per day. That is much less than what we're seeing nationally, and so it could be underreporting, under-awareness. It could be because those who took our survey might have younger children than the national average. Anyway, interesting to look at what's happening nationally and what we're having reported here. And then consistent with national data, the most frequently used apps, the top 3 in our survey and the top 3 nationally, are YouTube, Snapchat, and TikTok. So we'll see what happens with TikTok in the coming weeks and months, but for now, that's where we are. So another item asked parents to rate the danger of social media using a scale from 1, not at all dangerous, to 10, extremely dangerous. And we really tried to present this item in a way so as not to be leading, like how dangerous do you think social media is, but really evaluate when you think of social media, what are your perceptions about this. The average rating, the median rating was 8 for our sample, and so you can sort of see the distribution. It's definitely, perceptions are that it is something that is dangerous to our children. We asked a couple of items about mental health and neurodevelopmental diagnoses and medication. Again, just to try to get a picture of what might be some of the possible outcomes. We are not physicians, we don't have any connection with anything there, but really just to try to explore what's happening with the data. And we did notice that there was a positive correlation in our sample between phone use and mental health and neurodevelopmental diagnoses and medication use. Other studies, especially those reported by Jonathan Haidt in the book that Colleen was mentioning, also are finding this, and even with a relatively small sample, it was interesting that we were able to notice that in some of our data. And you can see of our sample, about 22% of respondents report that their children have either a neurodevelopmental or mental health diagnosis, and 14% that their children take medication, which is similar-ish to the national average of 28% and 8% respectively. Now, perhaps of most interest are the items that we asked related to phones in schools. So among children with phones, so we just isolated those respondents who said their children had phones, 79% report that their children bring those to school. That is way below the national average of 97%. So again, my mom says, geez. Again, this is perhaps underreporting, perhaps unawareness. I don't know, but it's likely that more than 79% of students in this region bring their phones to school. And this to me was really interesting. So we wanted to know why parents, why do you think your children should be bringing their phones to school? As you can see from the pie chart here, 35%-ish wanted their children to bring their phones to school to support their independence. And that to me is really interesting because in my mind, a phone can serve more as a tether, sort of the extended umbilical cord to the parents, rather than supporting that independence. So if the goal is to try to teach your children independence and skills, I think some of the data, not our own data, but other research has really shown that not to be the case. That independence is best supported when children are able to disconnect away from their phones and away from their parents. Other concerns included wanting to be able to communicate throughout the school day, safety concerns, and social concerns, which were things like, well, all my friends have a phone, can I have one too? Can I please bring it to school? And nationally, it's more commonly reported that parents want to be in touch with their children in case of an emergency. So that's the most cited reason nationally, but we did not find that in our data. The last point that I will highlight is related to support for a phone-free school environment. So you can see the bar graph here where we do have a bimodal distribution where the two most common responses were 1, absolutely not in support, and 10, absolutely in support. So this is a polarizing topic as demonstrated by this graph. But those who are absolutely in support are much more commonly occurring than those who are against it. So I think that motivates some of what we're hoping to achieve through this discussion, the great work that's been done at the state level and that's happening nationally, and really excited to turn it over to Tom and the panel, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have before. I'm also happy to stick around after and chat if that's helpful. Okay, well, thank you so much. Without further ado, back to Colleen and Tom.
We literally just analyzed that data like last night. We were putting some of the final touches on it. So we will be making it available. We'll be publishing it and we'll make it available. I'll probably get it out, the same links that we have your emails now. So if anyone is interested in it. So I guess this is where we get to begin the panel discussion. In your program, Charlie Keller was supposed to be here from the FBI, specifically talking about the safety aspects of kids bringing their phones to school. Charlie had to cancel a couple days ago, and he got pulled into the border agent in Vermont that got shot. He got pulled into the investigation over there, and he apologized profusely. He actually wanted to really be here. And as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, Katie McPherson from BARC was still on the tarmac on the runway at Reagan National. So I told her to not bother because there's no way to get to Burlington, to fly from Reagan to Burlington and make it to Plattsburgh. And she kind of laughed and she said they're never going to let me off this flight right now. So she's probably just arrived to Burlington and she's going to turn around and go home. So so we are lucky to have the 4 panelists that we do have, and Tom will take it from here.
Hello everybody, welcome. We're going to start, I'm going to read the bios of our guests so you know who's here tonight and who's going to be participating. We talked about the questions. Write down the questions on your card, we'll collect them, we'll read them. Also, if you have questions for Kylie, if you're thinking over the next few minutes and you're like, I do have a question for Kylie, you can fill it out. Or we also have a portable microphone that we can give to Kylie and she can answer questions as well when we get to the question period. So, however you would like to do it. It is my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guest tonight, our panelist. Maria Fernandez is the Deputy Secretary of Education for New York State Governor Kathy Hochul, where she helped shape and drive the governor's education agenda in K-12 and higher education. With over 20 years at IBM, including serving as General Counsel for Latin America, Maria has extensive experience in leadership, ethics, and compliance. Maria Fernandez. Elizabeth Mitchell is the organizing director of Mothers Against Media Addiction, a grassroots movement of parents fighting back against media addiction and creating a world in which real-life experiences and interactions remain at the heart of a healthy childhood. Elizabeth joins us from Washington, D.C. tonight. Thank you for coming. David Rounds has taught social studies at Bethlehem High School in Del Mar for 30 years and serves as the boys' varsity lacrosse coach. He has been president of the Bethlehem Central Teachers Association for over 20 years. David strongly supports the phone-free policy after witnessing its positive impact on students' focus and learning. Welcome, David. And Aaron Stewart is the Chief of Psychology at the University of Vermont Health Network, CVPH, and founder of Really Be You, a health and wellness consultancy that provides health information to individuals and organizations. She was awarded for exemplary teaming and coaching with the Department of Mental Health and Department of Children and Families. Thank you all for being here. Let's begin with the questions. Maria, we're going to start with you, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me?
We can. Can you discuss some of the particulars of Governor Hochul's proposal to limit cell phone use in schools, and particularly in the classroom?
Sure. So I may have to go to my phone to just make sure I don't leave the items out. But the first one is that was commented on earlier by Colleen, which is, by Jamie, which is the bell-to-bell. And the idea is that the cell phone, as I'm sure many of our experts will tell us, have created addiction. They have impacted mental health. They've impacted students' abilities to feel comfortable in the classroom because they may be videotaped, they may be receiving notices, they're clearly distracted. And in terms of all of that, the governor sort of decided that it was time to do something. However, because this is an important policy and because generally the governor doesn't tend to kind of pass these type of mandates, one of the things that she did was she did a number of listening sessions throughout the state. And I went with her to most of them, so I know kind of the content. And I will tell you, overwhelmingly, individuals wanted it. And it was parents, it was superintendents, it was teachers. And I think there was a little bit of a fear that if they were going to come out with a policy, they would have issues. And so they asked the governor to kind of step in, and the governor does not back down from a fight. So she said, I will be the heavy. I will work on that. And so we've worked on the policy to try to ensure it's as flexible as possible. So the first one is bell to bell. The second is that the student needs to have some means of storing the phone. And that could be the locker. It could be, those little shoe bag thing, cubbies that we used to have back in the day, and some people still use them, like me, where you can put the little phones in, or some people have cages on the desk. Other people have little slot things where you can put the phone. So that was the requirement. We also required that there be exceptions, certain exceptions that we felt were necessary. One is for medical needs. There are many students for whom the phone is the means of tracking. For example, if you have diabetes, it's a very valuable piece, and we didn't want to interfere with that. The other is for academic purposes. So it could be part of someone's IEP or 504 that they need to be able to use the phone for certain aspects. Or a teacher says, please bring your phone, we're going to do this work on it. All of that would be exempted. And then there would be sort of school-specific concepts. And one of the things that we added was translation purposes. As you know, we have a large number of individuals who have come in recently who do not speak English and for whom the phone may be the only way in which they can translate something. So those are the types of exceptions that we put in. We asked the schools to ensure that they had a policy, that they drafted a policy, that it was readily available. But what we asked them to do was to ensure that that policy was driven by conversations with parents and guardians, students, teachers, everyone together to come together and kind of decide what is the right policy in terms of what you were doing. The other piece we had is we understood that there's some cost associated with this, so there will be some funding that comes with the phones, and it's basically $10 per student at a certain grade level and above, because the view is that everything can kind of be somewhat flexible. Now, let me see if I missed anything. If you will give me a second. Nope, it's taking too long to pull up. So,
Let me just follow up very quickly.
Yes.
You're talking about the $13 million that the governor put in her
Yes.
budget to pay for this.
Yes.
To pay for the pouches.
Correct.
To pay for storage system, to pay for a security system.
correct.
Is that the only thing the legislature is going to have to approve, is the funding for that? This is not contingent upon the legislature approving this policy, is it?
No, it is. It
The
is.
state lawmakers are going to be the ones that decide whether this policy moves forward.
Yes, and what we have seen is that there's been a number of state lawmakers that were with us at the listening sessions that have signed off and indicated that they are interested in doing this. And we also have both, the New York State Teachers Union as well as UFT, who have both said it's just time. If it were anything else like cigarettes that were harming our children, we would stop it. But yet the phone, and I get it, we're all addicted to the phone. I am also addicted to the phone, right? And so that's kind of the thought process behind it.
Very good. I'm going to do one thing very quickly. So I'm going to put these two mics together. This is going to help a little. So when
Okay.
Maria's talking, we're going to do this, and when Elizabeth's talking, we're
Okay.
going to do this. And so now Aaron is going to be next, so we're going to do this. All right? And so when every speaker does it, we're going to put the two mics together because these are the mics that go for the audience, and these go for the TV station. So,
Oh,
all right.
okay.
Excellent. Little housekeeping. Thank you.
We're all
So
learning.
We're
We're all
going to go a
learning.
little bit out of order as far as the panelists go, but Aaron, you're next, and thank you again for joining us. Can you tell us why you believe these cell phone restrictions are
I've been in the field for 18 years, and I started out as a forensic psychologist, so I specialize in violence prevention and psychological trauma prevention. And this is my first healthcare job at the hospital. Been there 6 years in May. And I'm very closely affiliated with both of the locked units, and also make it my business to know who comes into the ER and who doesn't for mental health evaluation. And at the beginning of my career, when somebody was presenting me a case to consult on, and one of my specialties is human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking of youth and exploitation. When somebody was presenting me a case to consult on, my first question always was, what's their family like? Who do they have? And now my question is, where is their cell phone, and what is their online life like? And that is across the board for suicidality, self-injury, trafficking, sexual assault, all of the most high-end. And granted, my life lives in high acuity mental health. So I'm at the highest end of what I see in kids and youth. But my first question always is, what is their online life like? And my work has progressed so far that now when I interview kids, the majority of my interview to figure out why they're suicidal, why they're self-injurious, why they're socially anxious, why they're depressed, why they're truant, why they're exploited, is about what they do online and on their cell phone, and what their altered reality is of the human people around them, because they live in different spaces now. And so it's been very hard to become the type of psychologist that I am now. But I'm worried all of the time about the kids and adolescents that I treat and try to help them solve their problems. We're seeing a new kind of kid now that has behavioral outbursts when their electronics are taken away. And those kind of kids cannot say why they're suicidal or why they're self-injuring or where they learned it or all of the questions that I used to ask. They just explode immediately. And so the families are very frightened to take their electronics away, to discipline them, to supervise them, to teach them, because there's so much rage and explosiveness that happens. The parents are frightened. When you have a question about, to the parents, what does it look like when you say that they can't have their cell phone or they need a restriction or there's a certain time lapse, the parents are saying they're too scared to do anything about it. And so the reason why I think it's really important is because we're seeing a child and youth now who can't have a face-to-face conversation, can't sit for more than 30 seconds to a minute without somebody stimulating them. Their entire identity is based on what is happening on their online life. We're seeing kids that are exchanging nude images and nude videos for vapes through Snapchat and all of the platforms. And I believe in it because it is a community and a culture that has no rules. And we haven't defined the rules. And all of us, our brains only feel safe when where there are rules and guidelines to the culture. And there aren't, teenagers and adolescents don't have a frontal lobe, and there's no guardrails online and on those platforms. And so I'm here because I talk about it all of the time, but I'm also really worried. I have 2 children, they're 6 and 8, and they talk about things that I have never spoken to them about, that they learn at school from their friends about YouTube, Snapchat, Insta. Mom, are you gonna post us on Facebook? And I'm worried about it. I'm worried about the kids. I'm worried about all of the children.
I was going to follow up with the question, how bad is the problem? But I think you just.
Well, so I'm on the highest end in Vermont and New York of the kid cases that are extremely acute. I always have been. That's where I've always worked. But I would say that the problem is extremely bad because we bring kids in now for treatment and they talk about learning to cut in cutting rings online, learning to be suicidal better online, learning about psychiatric hospitalization online, and then try to get it done. And the risk of that is that their parents are of a different generation, and so they don't know what they're supervising. There's no way for parents to learn quickly enough to get in front of adolescents and their capability online. So we're treating that with medicine, and it's actually not a medicine problem. And so I think the problem is severe, and I think the time is yesterday, last week, 10 years ago. Yeah.
David, I'm going to have the microphones down to you. Welcome, we appreciate you driving up from Albany. When did your school district enact your current policy? How long ago?
About a year and a half ago. It was the fall of 2023.
And what do you see?
I see a complete transformation in our students and our school. I was not a supporter of our school outright banning cell phones from bell to bell. We did have a policy in place which included the phone pockets, where students, when the bell rang, would put their phones in the pocket on the side of the room. And I think because I enforced that policy strictly, I was a little naive to the extent of the problem. And with the cell phone usage for students, it wasn't like it was not there and then one day it appeared. It was like a slow creep in terms of usage over the years. And I think a lot of us became a little numb to how significant the problem was and how the students were disengaging from each other and disengaging with us until the problem got so bad that you couldn't ignore it anymore. And when the school district first proposed an outright ban, I thought it was overreach. I thought it was interfering on a parent's right to choose what their child should have access to. And I also thought it was too much local overreach in micromanaging the kids. And I took the approach of, when you get to college, it's the Wild West, and these kids need to learn self-discipline and self-management, and I was wrong. The apps don't allow the kids to learn self-management. And I didn't realize that until they were forced to not have the phone access. And one of the biggest, there was anxiety about the policy among the parents and among the students. But the biggest piece of anxiety that the students had about the policy is they were afraid they would miss out until they realized all their friends didn't have access to the phones all day long. And when they got to the end of the day and they would check their apps when they got out of school, there was no communications because nobody else was on their phones either. And once they realized they weren't missing out on some great party without them attending, they started to relax. And I've attended many of these sessions, and some with students from Bethlehem and some with students from other schools. And the majority of the students themselves they'll still admit they're not crazy about the policy, but they will also admit that they're less anxious, and they themselves realize how much personal engagement they're doing now as opposed to the past. Me as a teacher, I honestly didn't recognize how over the years that lack of engagement was dropping because it was happening slowly over time. But when the students have access to their phone and you're seeing their faces again and they're smiling again and they're not waiting to the bell to talk to each other because they're not staring at their phone until the bell rings, and they have to walk into the class and they're walking in talking to a friend and they're saying hi to you again, rather than me as a teacher having to say, hey, how you doing today? And basically getting in their face in order to get, some acknowledgement that I'm even there. It's not like that anymore. And Kylie, I mean, no offense, I'm the anti-data guy. I don't have any data. I have no data to support what I'm saying. It's just observational. But I see little things all the time that made me a believer because, like I said, I was, as union president, after 20 years, when the administration comes up with the idea, my gut reaction became, no. And that was my reaction to this at first. This is never going to work. It's too much. It's going to be a failure. Why waste their time? But there's things I observe all the time now. And one of the things that I observed this last month or a month and a half ago was when I used to walk past a cafeteria, it was dead silent. And the kids would all be staring at their phones, not talking. In December, I walked past the cafeteria, and this is not in any way an exaggeration. It was a group of about 20 students singing Christmas carols. And we have brought food tables and games and puzzles into our cafeteria, and the kids are using them. And our cafeteria is like a loud, robust place now, and it had not been like that for years. And, I was a doubter, I was a denier. I would never, ever, ever want our school to go back to where it was before, never.
You talk about the observations you're seeing a difference.
Yeah, and I think, there is data that our school presented. When we banned cell phones at our high school, our discipline referrals went down 65%. Even though most of the teachers didn't see the phones because we had a pocket policy, they were constantly, as soon as the bell rang, they'd rush to the corner, get the phones, all passing period, all lunch, all free periods that they had them, they'd be on their phones. And most of the discipline problems in our school were connected to phones during their free time. And when those referrals dropped 65%, our administrators actually had the free time to start tracking down students who had attendance issues. And so not only did we see a drop in discipline referrals, we actually, and as a union president, I would never say this, but we had to release one of our social workers because they were specifically hired to deal with anxiety cases. When we created the cell phone policy, the number of kids that were experiencing anxiety during the school day also dropped. The kids who were seeking help on a regular basis. And we hired an additional 1.0 that we didn't need, so they reallocated that staffing to something else. Our attendance has improved because our administrators are now spending time not dealing with discipline related to phones as much, and they're now dealing, last year, I can't remember the exact number, it was north of 500, like there was 500 meetings our administrators had last year with students and their parents related to attendance, not related to discipline. And I can see it in the kids' faces, they're happier. And it's not something you can fake, they're laughing more, they're talking more, they're engaged more. Like when they're in a hallway, it's loud again in a positive way.
You mentioned the administrators. Have the teachers have they become enforcers though?
I haven't seen a phone in my classroom in over 18 months. Literally, I have not seen a phone, and that's not exaggeration. I have not seen a phone in 18 months since the policy has gone into effect. Every once in a while, our administrators do have to tweak the policy a little bit. For example, we saw an increase in this fall of students saying that they were just leaving their phones at home. So, because when the kids walked into the school, they had to put their phones in the pouch. We have the Yonder pouches. They had to show our security or the administrators that they were doing that. So increasingly more students were saying, you know, I'm leaving my phone in the car, or I'm leaving my phone at home. And so that number was going up to the point where the administration was like, they're probably not doing that. So they tweaked the policy in the fall where if the student said, I left my phone at home, they would say, okay, come over to this phone. They would use a school phone, they'd call the parent, and the parent would have to verify that in fact. So as soon as they started doing that for a few days, all of a sudden the number of the kids that said that they're leaving their phone at home dropped, and there was more kids like showing the pouch again. At our school, we do not discipline you if you do get caught with a phone. Every once in a while, there'll be a kid that, you know, puts it in their pocket and they get caught, you know, on a video camera, like, you know, walking down the hall with their phone or whatever. And they don't get a referral for that. What happens is they have to report to one of our offices for 30 straight days, and they have to surrender their phone in the office. And if they say they left their phone at home, then for 30 straight days, they have to call the parent to verify that it's at home. But we have not written a single kid up or suspended a kid, you know, in violation of the policy. That's not the approach we take.
Excellent. And I'm going to come back to you. I learned moderating a long time ago. You don't ask all the good questions right at the beginning. You save some for a couple of minutes from now. We're going to talk to you about a few incidents you actually had at your school that have put the policy to the test, and we're going to come back and talk about that in just a few minutes. Thank you, David. We appreciate it. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming up from Washington and joining us tonight. Your group, Mothers Against Media Addiction, is a grassroots movement of parents who are fighting back against media addiction. Tell us what your group is focused on and why.
Well, one, we're very supportive of this bill. We're seeing this as a national trend. It's one of the most incredible kind of bipartisan effort. With all of these subjects, what is really impressive to me is how bipartisan this is. You know, this is happening here in New York. We also have Governor Sanders down in Arkansas, who's also trying to pass this. So I think it's really impressive to see how bipartisan this whole work has been. I know that I'm your substitute for the FBI person. I have a child who in DC who goes to a school that's phone free. We're looking at passing this policy in DC right now, so I can also speak to the parent experience and a little bit to the safety, because we have talked to a number of lawmakers. One of the most interesting conversations and kind of jarring to me was a Michigan lawmaker who is not the Oxford district but next door. So he was talking to us about how, you know, he really wants this policy because one of the issues they encountered was when that shooting happened, their 911 system was completely flooded. and so were their cell towers. They could not actually do their jobs as first responders because so many people were trying to get in touch. Another issue, I don't want to go too far off of this, but and I'm not a first responder, but the people that I've talked to and what we have learned is that when the worst things happen, they want your children paying attention to the adults in the room. They want them paying attention to the people who know where the exits are, who know how to do this. The last thing any of us want as a parent, I have 2 kids, is for a cell phone to go off in a moment like that. Doesn't matter what the message is. You want your child to be safe. So I want to reiterate that there are experts who have weighed in on this. We can speak to that if you want, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands that, because as much as we want to be there with our child in that moment, we need to make sure our child survives that moment. And that's what we're hearing from lawmakers.
And maybe now's the time to come right back to
Oh,
David,
sorry.
because- No.
We didn't plan this.
It works out perfectly because David, Bethlehem had a swatting incident last fall. In fact, you had several days, right, where you had swatting calls come in. You went into lockdown, the school went into lockdown. It was after school hours, so the kids actually had their phones. But tell us what happened with the phones, with the kids having their phones and a swatting incident locking down the school.
Yeah, I mean, to put it bluntly, what happened because the kids had access to the phones was just, it was terrible. It was terrifying. Again, because it was after school, we had extracurricular clubs going on. We had sporting events that involved students from other schools. We had parents, we had grandparents. They estimated that we had close to 1,000 people on our athletic fields in all different areas. And then we were the victim of an international cyber terrorism swatting ring. And the individual based out of Ontario had hacked schools' computer systems to the point where they were able to identify specific things about kids. Like, I'm coming after so-and-so at 4:15 when they're on field 3 practicing football or whatever. So when the threats came in, they were so specific that the school district absolutely reacted appropriately and went into a lockdown after school, which when you have kids on the field, that's not an easy thing to do. Within seconds of the lockdown, the amount of rumors that were spreading on social media from not just our students, but from the students who are from other schools, from their parents, from, it made the situation so worse. For example, and one of the rumors that was going on around is that there was an active shooter in the hallway outside of our school pool, and there was our girls' swimming team was practicing at the time, and the girls in lockdown in the pool area were receiving messages from their parents and from other students that, you got to do your best to hide, you got to run. And I get choked up thinking about, how scared these kids were. Like, those kids believed that the shooter was outside of the door. And some of those kids couldn't come to school for weeks. And in the end, it was just rumor. It was just a rumor that circulated on social media about where the whereabouts where the shooters were. And it made a terrible situation so much worse. And unfortunately, it continued for about 2 weeks until, thankfully, the FBI was able to, apprehend a person, and with the help of the Canadian authorities, they were able to arrest the person, and came to an end. But when the incidents happened after school, and the kids had access to their phones, it just made a really bad situation more complicated and more traumatic.
We know one of the biggest concerns we hear from parents is about not being able to reach their children immediately if there's an emergency, if they don't have their phones. How do you respond to parents, and has that been an issue at all since you've put the ban in effect?
That was the biggest piece of opposition that the parents expressed, was what about emergencies? I live in a community where I work, and I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a local restaurant or a store, and a parent has now come up to me and said, "We are so glad you did this, because we didn't have the courage to be the only family that said you're not taking your phone to school." So parents have come to appreciate the fact that the school made a difficult decision and they didn't have to make it. But when it came to emergencies, the reality is, we use Yonder pouches. Those are now indestructible. Like, if there was a real emergency in a classroom and you had to access your phone, the kids could rip the pouches open. I mean, the pouches are designed to be a deterrent in a peaceful situation in a normal day. But if they ever truly, really needed to access their phones, you could easily do it by ripping the pouches open. So I don't really buy that element of it anymore. And, I mean, I trust the parents to trust me educating the kids, so I trust the FBI and our state police and local police who tell us access to the phones makes the situation more dangerous, not safer. And, you know, I'm a parent of 4 children. If there was a crisis at our school, I would absolutely want information on what was happening to my children, but not if that immediate information made the situation more dangerous. So I trust the authorities that if they say it's more dangerous to have access to the phones, then I'm trusting them.
Let me ask you, I imagine with the governor's listening to her, she heard that a lot from parents about wanting to be able to reach their kids at any time, and so that probably was some of the pushback, I'm sure, that you folks have heard.
Absolutely, and I think it will continue to be until folks really kind of understand why, to your point, and some of the things that you said are important. One of the things that the governor did ask is that the schools, it's included in the bill, is that the schools have to have a means of the parents being able to get to the child during the day for other purposes. In an emergency, that means they have to communicate. And so all of the schools, it's incumbent upon them to develop a means of saying, this is what's happening, making sure that message is out. And it is a concern, but we have spoken to our state police and various law enforcement folks in the different areas where we went for the listening tours. And they all said the same thing. You know, what if a phone goes off when the shooter is there, right? They now know where your child is. And that could be you trying to find them. The same piece about, you know, if someone's saying go left and the person's on their phone. I mean, I have, you know, a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old. If I tell them to take out the garbage and they're on YouTube, I've had the garbage show up in different places, right? Because they're like, I didn't know what you said. I thought you meant outside. No, outside garage, not outside. So it is an issue, and we do want to ensure that the policy is clear on the websites, that there is a communication means, and that people really do understand why it's safer.
And you're also not the first state. There are other states that have implemented these
Yeah.
policies, and it's very successful. So I
Yeah,
just
there's
wanted-
there's 19.
Yes,
Let's
19.
talk a little bit about that. Several other states
No, go ahead.
have put policies in place in recent years. How are they working?
I think they're working very well. I don't have specific, there's a lot of states, so I don't have all the specific information with me today. I know that this is also happening in New Jersey, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Arkansas, as I previously mentioned. But that, you know, to your point, I think we're gathering, it's pretty new, but their returns are good. We're hearing, you know, students are more engaged. People are talking in the hallways, exactly what you're saying. It's the same thing I see at my son's school. And I think it is widely popular.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with you, Maria. You folks have probably talked to other states as well.
Yes, we have. I mean, we've looked at other policies to try to figure out what have been some of the concerns and some of the issues. We also, and there's 19, by the way, as of 2024, we had 19 states that have cell phone bills. The other piece that we did, in addition to the listening sessions, which were important to us, is we went to a number of community stakeholders, particularly sort of those who were in the community, working with the students, to make sure that we were encompassing things that we thought needed to be in there. So the translation was one that came loud and clear from various of the organizations that said you can't shut down a child who doesn't know how to communicate with their teacher. So yes, we have talked to other states. We've kind of picked what has worked and not worked. And I think the governor did a lot of extensive research and thought into what we ended up with.
Aaron, I may come back to you if I can for kind of a broader question.
Before you ask me a broader question, I have a little bit of a soapbox about school violence. And I think that it is incredibly reactionary for people to look back on incidents of violence and question what happened without understanding the cell phone and online usage and justification of violence of kids and adolescents. School emergencies don't happen in a vacuum, and we're not doing the front end work, role modeling kindness and human regard for other people. We know that we speak more harshly as adults and children online and in front of a screen than we would in face-to-face contact. And I cannot even describe the things that I have read online that are so incivil and hostile and vile. And I think that we have to think about not just the type of emergency that happens in a school violence incident, but the type of emergency that is low burning in all of our children that feel empty and lonely and desperate and depressed and anxious after they're online and on their cell phone. And they're not sleeping, and they're not eating, and they're living in realities where humans are not to be regarded. And so I feel very strongly that we can't just talk about one type of emergency because it's the one that scares all of us as parents. But we have to talk about the mental health crisis, the crisis of divisiveness and incivility in and amongst our communities, and the lack of belonging and welcoming that we're doing to certain types of adolescents and youth that give them justification for violence and school violence.
You counsel families. Are the majority of parents aware of what their children are seeing on social media?
No. So those are always my hardest conversations, and it's usually in straight families, it's usually the conversation with the dad, which is the hardest. In other families, it's the conversation with the mom. It's whoever thinks they know the most, and then they find out that they didn't know. But it is heartbreaking for the families, and I do it all of the time, but they don't know what the apps do. They don't know what their children are doing. There's secret files that all of the kids have moved around and locked. They know how to access their parents' phones and are looking at what their parents are doing. They're using the dark web. They're soliciting substances from other countries on the dark web. And so the parents don't understand what is happening, and they're always heartbroken and always feel guilty that they didn't know. But I always try to be really validating, is like, the teenage brain doesn't want the parent to know. We've known that for a really long time. They're motivated by their peers and the peer culture. That's what the adolescent brain does. They don't want the parent to know, so the parent is meeting so many barriers and trying to figure out what's happening on the device and the generational gap. And also, we're not training parents, and the kids are not gonna train the parents. I've watched and I've tried to make kids train their parents and watched how they do it, and they leave out everything important. So, like, those are the heartbreaking conversations that the parents just didn't know.
We're going to start collecting cards and asking questions from audience members. Maria, let me ask you about the bell-to-bell. Does that give school districts the option of having different rules and policies for high schoolers, middle schoolers, and elementary school kids? If we're hearing that perhaps the majority of elementary school kids aren't on phones until 11 or 12, should they have different policies than the high schools and middle schools?
No. And the idea was that it was meant to be really bell to bell. And while, yes, younger children do not have cell phones, we know that some of them have watches with which their parents communicate with them, right? So it's really about that internet system, and it's about teaching the student how to use a phone appropriately and to be able to focus in the classroom. So yeah, it is truly bell to bell.
Some schools have policies now that do allow the students to access their phones during study hall or lunch. Is that a problem, or is that?
That is not it is not part of what is allowed. It's really meant to be bell to bell.
Because our school's seeing issues where kids now are
Yes.
They're away from their devices for 2 or 3 hours,
Yeah.
and when they get a chance to go to them, they're
Yes.
focused on them.
Yeah, I mean, for the governor, it's more than just learning, right? The learning is the classroom piece, right? Is not having the phone so that it's either pinging or ringing or vibrating or whatever it is that the phone is doing to disturb you, or that you're not looking at stuff. But outside of the classroom, it's the mental health, which the governor has put a lot of money and a lot of time into, over $1 billion, to try to address mental health in New York State. And it's, the students are really where we're seeing it the worst. And I think to the examples that were given from Bethlehem, what you get is that interaction. So the governor has also combined this with other initiatives, which include additional focus and funding for mental health, as well as this concept of go outside and play, which is to, and she started it over the summer. She opened up several pools and said, we're not going to charge fees for students and children to use those pools and families, because we want people to scroll less and do more. So she's also put in place, we're going to do playgrounds, we're going to do community centers, we're going to help, figure out how to have state parks have more attractions for children. And that's all to try to foster this concept that your whole world is not the phone.
The governor's hoping to get lawmakers' approval.
Yes.
What is the target date to have this in place for all schools in New York by this coming fall?
Yes, September of 2025, or August if they start in August, but.
All right. The other option is we do have a wireless microphone. If you folks would rather stand up and ask a question, we can certainly do that as well. Or we can start with some of the...
I tried to categorize them, but they're
Okay.
and if you can't read them, let me know.
Well, that was going to be the other thing. If I can't read handwriting, I'm going to say, who wrote this? And you're going to have to get up and ask the question.
You have a roving.
And this is perfect. When will bell to bell be implemented? I think we just did. We just answered that.
September 2025.
For your question. Thank you, Kim, for that question. Aaron, will you create a message public service announcement for schools? Question from
Sure. In my spare time, yes. So if I could create a public service announcement,
I might be able to help with this. This
Okay.
is kind of where, sorry. She's busy, so this is on us. She's out there treating people. So this is actually the work that Mama does. This is what you do. We need to take a moment to thank you, because today has not been easy on you. This has been a very stressful day. Yes. We need to give her a round of applause and buy her around after this event. But you have a remarkable group right here that's doing this work, that's spreading these messages, that's getting the information out there. We are in we have 32 chapters in 20 states. Sorry, I just redid these numbers today. We're expanding exponentially, but there are lots of groups like us that are spreading. We don't like to talk about the doom and gloom, but it needs to be said. I think this is the thing. We know that being on devices is not great. We know that I think every parent, every person, every grandparent, has an inkling of that. We see it and we're like, this can't be good. I imagine it's how people thought about smoking before, where they're like, this doesn't feel like it's good. And similarly, Jonathan Haidt has a great example. We used to have vending machines. We used to have vending machines full of cigarettes. Well, we realized that kids were accessing vending machines. That's unbelievable to me right now, right? But I remember it. It was in my lifetime. I'm 47. They used to be able to, VFW Hall, there was totally a cigarette vending machine. These apps are designed, they're like casinos. The scrolling, all of these different design elements are made to hook people, especially developing minds, which is what you were talking about. So I just want to reiterate that, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but you guys are doing the work, and I think it's really up to parents, community members to really spread this information. This is the work that our group does, but there are groups like this all over. As soon as we set up a chapter, there are 100 people in the room, because parents are desperate for answers, even children are. So yes to a public service announcement, but let's also then take that public service announcement and make sure it's on every listserv. Everyone we're talking to knows about it. So
Thank you. And let me follow right up with Aaron, one of the questions from the audience. How can we train parents?
So I don't think that the training about safe behavior online and safe behavior on cell phones is about safe behavior online or safe behavior about cell phones. I think it's about a family critically thinking about what they want their culture to be like, and a school critically thinking about what they want their culture to be like, and then deciding that they don't care if people don't like them for being different and for being on the edge. And so I think some of that parent training is that parents have open conversations in front of their children about identity, about esteem, self-esteem, about their cultural values in the home, providing teens and adolescents actual information about what the risks are, and having open dialogue and boundaries in the home, and having the schools have open dialogue and boundaries in the school about all types of things, not just about cell phones, so that we're growing the adolescent brain to be critical thinkers and to sit in front of people and dialogue and negotiate and think and speak in a kind and respectful way. I am worried about the way that our teenagers and adolescents speak to each other, but I'm also worried about the way that the families speak to us as providers, and the way that they come into the hospital, the language that they use, the way that they interact with people that they think serve them. And that's all being role modeled to their children. So I don't think it's just about cell phones. I think it's about human regard and empathy for other people, and having that be a familial value or a school value or a community value.
Thank you. Question for Maria, for Elizabeth, and for Dave, from an audience member. Do you have thoughts or recommendations about other screens in schools, especially devices for younger students that they may be using? And I'm sure the question is, are they included?
So to the extent that anything that would come into the school that would be internet enabled would not be allowed, except for the exceptions. The schools do have computers that they may or may not use, or the little Chromebooks or whatever they use. The other piece that the state education department is working on is building a media literacy. There's some media literacy stuff that came out from Dishes, but that's more of the dangerous, stay away, red flag kind of thing. They're working on something else around standards to help teach the students what the phone is for, what's appropriate, not appropriate. So I think you'll see that kind of start from the very beginning, sort of the concept of technology and how do you use it and how do you benefit from it, and that will get embedded into the school systems.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is about ed tech, like if it's the use of like kind of switching to that rather than doing the typical stuff. This is a subject that we're about to get into. There's a new website coming out that one of our partners is developing that has a lot more resources. So this is definitely something that we're looking at. I think there are new studies, new things are coming out. It's kind of, I mean, I think I'm looking at you, data. Like this is, we want data. We want to know what the impacts are. We can't just say like, well, we don't like it. We need to have data to back it up. We're spending money on them. These are things that we need to know more about. And I will say, I have a autistic child who goes to school on an autism campus, and I just want to be clear that we are not anti-tech. Technology allows, as you said, translators, but even there are students on his campus who would not be able to communicate just with a regular person, I shouldn't say regular person, sorry, with their classmates and other people without those devices. So I think we absolutely recognize that there are places for these things. But to your point, we also want to work on legislation. We do not think this is something that parents should be shouldering all by themselves. This is something that, not the governor's office, but there are quite a few bills. New York is a little bit further ahead with some of these things, but there's still a very far way to go. And I'm in DC. We came really close to passing COSA, which is the Kids Online Safety Act. The last few weeks of the legislative session were whiplash for us. And there are parent survivors who did such a valiant job trying to get this passed. Again, it's extremely bipartisan. We had Senator Blackburn and Senator Blumenthal trying to pass this. We strongly believe that we haven't passed legislation on this since 1998. 1998. We haven't touched the internet with any sort of legislation. It has been the Wild west. So there are so many things we could be doing, but it's $1 trillion industry. So this is why we need you. This is why we do the grassroots stuff that we do. This is why we educate parents, community leaders, and teachers. And I think I just gave you a word salad that you might not have ordered. I drifted a little bit, but I think we're talking about ed tech. I don't know if you know that was even ed tech. Sorry.
Our policy bans all electronic devices outside, like, so no watches, no earbuds, no headphones, anything to that nature. All of our students do have their one-on-one devices, the Chromebooks, which are obviously managed by the school. I mean, because of Ed 2D law, recently, like, our school has now restricted even things like YouTube and Google Maps because of the privacy issues and sharing of data. So that the students don't even have access to that anymore. But any technology that our students would need for learning, they do have access to. So we do not have students that have access to phones in any capacity for educational purposes because we provide that technology through the Chromebooks. There were a lot of parents that were concerned about their students who had anxiety and whether or not the detachment from the parents during the day would trigger greater anxiety, and it was parents that definitely wanted their kids to have access to the phone so they could communicate them. But the reality, and the school held a position on this, the reality, we as teachers observed something completely opposite of what their parents were feeling. Like, the parents were feeling, my kid's anxious, it helps them to communicate with me during the day, but on the other end, we were seeing the kids were ruminating all day, and their parents were feeling the rumination, where the kid was talking to the parent would respond back, the kid would keep texting back, and the parents would go back and forth all day, and it would make anxiety so much worse by prolonging whatever the feeling was. In total, we have, I think, 12 students in our high school that have access to their phones for basically diabetes. Other than that, all of the other technology needs are provided through the Chromebooks.
And Aaron, I know you have to cut out early, or?
No, we still have time, yeah.
All right, excellent. A couple of questions here do ask about technology and safe technology. Is there safe technology that parents can have oversight and still the kids can have access to social media?
Technology is so adaptive. It is so important and critical. We can't ban technology because actually our world has gone too far with the healthy parts of technology. But the only way that you treat addiction is to replace the behavior with something else. And my hope is that families are replacing the maladaptive online and cell phone usage with adaptive device and technology use. Because we have a lot of kids whose brains now function in savant ways with technology and are gonna be incredible coders and incredible all of the things. But there are so many mindfulness and wellness and well-being apps and activities and calming and soothing and learning and developing and growing on technology that I hope that families and schools will use the technology. We use technology on the inpatient psychiatry unit. No cell phones allowed on either the child or adult unit. But we use technology because it's incredibly important to grow the brain. And we also have kids that are specialized and have specialized needs that respond so strongly to technology and don't respond very well to humans, and that's completely fine. So I just think it's really important to not zero tolerance electronics because we're already too far down the road of figuring out how to use them.
I would like to ask any members of the audience, if you're local parents, if your school has a policy in place right now and you'd like to talk about it, the pluses, the minuses, we'd love to hear from you. That's where I think Colleen has that wireless microphone. Oh, right there. We have heard that some schools have stricter policies than others. We've heard that some schools do, again, allow students to have access to the phones right now at certain times of the day. If you'd like to talk about the policy in your school district and the pluses or minuses, please feel free to do that. Uh, If you're getting your courage up, I'll ask Maria one more question.
Parents whose schools are.
You got one.
There you go. This doesn't really work. Just go. Hi, Bridget has a loud voice.
You project well, yeah.
She does, right?
I'm actually here with my middle schooler, Isabella. Hi, Bridget Heina. She is a middle schooler, 8th grader in Saranac District. She's like, gosh, we've been whispering over here because her school doesn't have a policy in place, but is trying to make it happen anyways in the school. And she's been talking about how it's been going okay for the most part, and that there isn't a huge, we haven't heard a huge amount of backlash from parents per se on this, but what I've heard in my community talking to parents is that they want it to happen, right? They, again, would love it to just be a blanket order so that they don't have to argue with their kids anymore. They don't have, Isabella is not allowed to bring her phone. I am one of those few parents who is like, I don't care what everybody else says or is doing because I know this is not going to be helpful for you. And there's days and times where we argue about that, for sure. But I find overall she's a really engaged student. We hear from her teachers all the time how she's not distracted in classes. She's coming home able to talk to us about her day, about what she's doing. She's, building good interpersonal connections with her peers. And she doesn't, I just asked her, I'm like, do you feel you miss out, right? Because you're not on the phone. And she said, not really, no. Not really, no. And she's also a student who has a lot of restricted, I'm a social media, I actually work within social media and digital media production and creation. So I actually work on helping students to learn how to create within these spaces. And so this is really hits home for me because using technology in creative, innovative, productive ways is so important. So I love this conversation about how do we, switch our learners, right, to be using technology in active, engaging ways instead of, to be a distraction. I hear it from my students when I pull them every semester, like, do you have to be online? And they say yes. I say, do you want to? Not always, right? They wish they say, my college students, they wish they were not allowed to be on social media when they were. They wish somebody would have stopped it from happening then. They're having a hard time getting over the addiction, right, in these spaces. So I think it would be great. Saranac is trying to work on it, and I think a policy from the governor would be amazing to just, we've seen it in our communities, how when it comes from that space, there's just, people will argue, people will be upset, but then they will get over it.
Thank you.
If I could just add to what Bridget just said. Our students, my college students, can't put the phone down. They cannot go through a 50, especially an hour and 15-minute class without looking at their phones. And when you try to tell them to put them in the backpack, like they just won't. It's kind of crazy. Anyone else?
I can share that our son goes to Stafford Middle School, and they do have a policy from bell to bell where they can have their phone. They do. That was new this year. I can also share that our son has a phone that doesn't have access to the internet. So, I was one of those parents that answered the survey that it gives him more freedom because he can go other places like the YMCA. It doesn't mean he remembers to call us and tell us that he's gone somewhere else, but it gives him the ability to reach out to us if he needs a ride when the school day is over. So he just got the phone this year before 8th grade. I also work in a school district where the high school has like a put the phone in the couches, so I've experienced two different scenarios, but I'm sorry that Katie from Bark isn't here because there are lots of phone options for parents that don't have internet and they don't have apps, and so you can still communicate. They can still communicate with their friends by texting and calling, and it doesn't have to be an iPhone. And it's also a lot less expensive. We do have the Bark phone than paying for the iPhone that he would lose because he has, no one's stealing his phone. So he might be mortified, but it does allow him to have some more freedom. But also, he forgets that he has it because there's nothing else on it besides calling and texting.
Do you use the Bark features when you're notified? Well,
We do, yep, so we do have the BART system within our home, which, has successfully pulled up things on the Amazon Alexa when, looking for some information. It also has successfully, the iPad is connected to my husband's phone, so for a little while I had to ignore the text messages between him and his friends, because it would flag those as well. So,
Take a second and explain to people that don't know what
so
Bark does.
if you were to go to Bark online, you would see that they have a variety of different options for cell phones, now watches, but also home monitoring on your internet, so anything that's connected to your internet. I mean, you could even connect our printer to it, not that you could, but there are devices on Bark at our house that I don't even know what they are because everything's connected to the internet now. So, but it has worked with the one and only iPad that our children have available to them. His work computer, because he works from home, his husband, and because the iPad's connected to his cell phone, like I said, because they will FaceTime on that with friends. So we've been using it for a couple of years now. It does cost money, so I think that's what's hard for, families that might not be able to, use that expense, or have that extra expense in their budget, but well worth it. And even on his cell phone, I don't have to read his text messages because I get alerted to every single thing. So if someone said, oh, well, I hurt my knee at practice, I'll get an alert that says, medical. And so I can, view that, and we really don't get very many alerts, but it opens up a lot of conversation for us. I think a lot of students don't know how to communicate. So the things that they say, they aren't realizing that they're typing things that are really hurtful. So we have a lot more conversation because we have this oversight without actually having to go into his phone and randomly spend our time reading every single text message when we don't know what there is, or searching their history on the internet. So,
Thank you.
When I became an interviewer, people always told me that it's easier to get information out of people if you know something already. And that has been something that has been incredibly difficult with having conversations with families, is they don't know what to ask or how to ask because they don't have any details. So they say, how was your day? And the teenager's like, it was fine. And okay, well, how'd you do with your friends? Fine, stop asking me questions. But if you have a little bit of information, you can say, I saw that you were having this thing between you and somebody. And the teenager brain is like, oh, I'm caught. They already know. I should give a little bit more information and explain myself. And so I think those types of things are really helpful for parents to jump off with a little bit of information, to dialogue with their kids, because otherwise the kids don't give up information freely. None of us do, actually. That's cute.
Yes?
Clayton Morris, I have a grandson at the Plattsburgh Middle School. We have a bell-to-bell, and I think it's working very, very well. I am also a modified swim coach at the Plattsburgh Middle School. And this is just a couple of observations now. Number one, the hallways, there's talking, there's a lot going on in the hallways. But I'm hearing here that we need to replace the phones with something. And for instance, with the swim team, and I'm sure all the coaches within the area, when they walk into the pool or when they walk into the gym, the phones are not on. They're not using them. They're interacting with either the coach or the players for the other team or something else. So they have forgotten about the phones, which leads me to what I think would help with our parents, and that is, and this is directed towards you, Secretary, Assistant Secretary, and the union, is extending the day of a school day such that we could have free time after school where the children are allowed to be children, as opposed to, we can't really let them go outside and just play anymore because we're beyond that. We shouldn't be, but we are. So we need to give them a place to be where they can be children without their phones. And if we give them that, we are going to help with extending that time that much longer. I mean, right now, we'll say it's 8 o'clock to 2:30. And if they're at practice or band or something along those lines, they're without their phones until 5 or 5:30. And you're seeing a much more rounded child when that is happening. I see it every day. So as a group, we need to fill that space. I mean, parents should be helped with doing that, but we need to fill that space. And school districts is a great place for that to happen, because the building's there, we have people there, it's safe, and that's what we're looking for. And that's what I would like to see, where it would go beyond what we have right now.
So the unique piece about New York State is that the governor does not own the state education department. It belongs to the legislature. So that's number one. The second unique piece about the state and the school districts is that all the school districts believe in local control. That's one of the reasons why this bill is a little problematic to some people, because it views like you're taking away local control. And as someone who was a former school board member, I understand that concept. You want to build a school that revolves around your culture, your values, your neighborhood. But this one's important. However, I think that there's a lot of discussion about how do we have these after-school activities, which is what's coming from the governor. And so hopefully that will help sponsor. And I think a lot of the schools have done that, have found alternative means to kind of bring things in. So if they don't use the pouches tend to be very expensive. And by the way, you can bang them real hard on the table and they open. You can also buy magnets on Amazon. But it's a deterrent, right? It's to kind of drive that stuff. The other options are cheaper. And so if you choose a cheaper option, you now have some money left over that you could perhaps use for some of those activities. Though I will tell you, one of the first things I told my son, who was a junior at the time, was, your mom's going to be the Deputy Secretary of Education. I'm going to extend the school day to 5 o'clock. That's going to be my first order of business. He did not appreciate it.
Thank you. And yes, does Colleen have the mic? Where
She
is the mic?
does right now.
Oh, you've got it. Excellent. Hi.
In the survey that was shared at the beginning with the digital behavior in children and teens, I would be interested to know if in that survey we have information about what ages are represented in that survey. Because as a school teacher of 34 years, school has changed significantly, and even more significantly in the last several years. My students, which range from 7th grade to 12th grade, admit pretty regularly that they spend on average 5 to 12 hours a day on their phones versus the 2 hours that's on the information we received at the beginning of tonight's information. And most of them will admit at this point, when they have their phones at school, they're spending between an hour and an hour and a half at the school day on their phones. So I'd just be interested in if in that survey we have information about what age was, because in our school we have a bell-to-bell, no phones for kindergarten through 8th grade, but our students use it in 9th through 12th grade. But I can tell you that even the students who are not supposed to have their phones in 7th and 8th grade often have their phones, and for many of the reasons we've talked about. So I would just be interested as that information, because to me that 2 hours a day might be parent awareness versus the reality of student time. I Because when an average 15-year-old admits to 12 hours a day on their phone, that's very concerning.
I'll bring this over to Kylie, but that's exactly what we were talking about when we were going through the data. The first thing I said is, oh, these parents have no idea. I did a class of freshmen. It's called College Freshman Seminar a couple years ago, and I made my students, or I had the students do a diary for 2 weeks of every bit of time they spent online, and the average in the class for freshmen, and this was 3 years ago, was 12 hours. And they will, even now, they will tell you they are online constantly. In fact, some of the Pew data, I think I stuck in the thing, they say almost constantly. So yeah, I think it's parental awareness.
Yeah, it was asking the parents, it was not asking the students, and so it does represent parental awareness. The ages were 5 through 18, so kindergarten through 12th grade, so it would be interesting. And these data, like I said, are still coming in, and so as we continue with this analysis, looking at average time of use by elementary, middle, and high school, certainly something to do, but even thinking, I'm online almost constantly, right? And so these are some of the concerns too with younger kids. I know ed tech has so many benefits, but I'm really worried about my second grader being online constantly at school.
If I can just add to that, sorry. One of the things we often ask our parents, volunteers, community members to do is to actually track their own online habits. I think that's really illuminating. There are apps you can get that actually will track you. On outside, there's a one-pager that has phone-free school on one side. On the other side, we have house rules. And some of these things are very basic, just trying to have dinner together, but it's something a lot of families have gotten away from. And I think one of the points that just always sticks with me, and I think this gets to like how we're treating each other, we have gotten really used to just, in the middle of a conversation, oh, my phone's going off. You just pull it up, right? And you look at, someone's talking to you. Someone's having a whole conversation with you, and you're interrupting it. I mean, you're like, no, this is more important. This right here is more important than whatever you're saying to me. And then we put it away, but we're not present in that moment, and we're modeling that for our children constantly. And I think that's a really important point. We need to look at our own behaviors too. It's much worse with kids, obviously. I'm 47, I wasn't raised, I'm part of that generation that started to have internet, but it was text, it was like very complicated. And I marvel at how quickly my children have just become addicted. It's so quick. It happens right before my eyes. I can see it happen. They just get engaged. So I wanted to surface that's really important that we do that. And to your point, the national average is 9 hours, but that's also changing all the time, and the research is coming in, and the data is updating, and all of these different things. So I think we're finally getting a lot of hard data about this, which is really important because it allows our lawmakers to actually approach these issues with all the data and force change.
Tom, I just wanted to respond to a few things briefly, just from observation more than anything else. You'll often hear that our children have lost the ability to communicate, that they don't know how to socially interact. And since we've implemented our policy, it's, as a positive, they do. When they're forced to do it and they get in the habit of doing it, they are looking you in the eye and they're talking. They are engaging in conversations. But you just have to break that pattern because the phone, especially in school, allowed them to isolate themselves. But when they can't isolate themselves, those habits of good communication start to come back relatively quickly from observation. And the other thing I've been asked, like, do the kids immediately get on our instructional day ends at 2:07? And are the kids like ravenous addicts who are running to the magnets to unleash their phones? And the answer is no, they're not. And even after the bell, you'll still see kids, you'll see them unlock their phone, but their first reaction is not this anymore. Their first reaction is often to unlock their phones and put it in their pocket. And they continue the conversation. And it's often that the kids leave the building and they kind of, oh, God, my phone's still in a pocket, and they have to come back in and unlock it. And I believe that's because we forced them to separate, And that forced separation has started to break that constant cycle that they got used to. So the statistics and the stories are grim, but from an observer standpoint, I've seen more pliability in the students' brains than I think might be recognized. And I do feel that they're bouncing back a little quicker when you force them to separate.
Did you spoke to this kind of, the kids are conflicted or one way or the other. I have a daughter that go to a camp where they're off the grid for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And I remember asking my daughter, what are you most looking forward to going to camp? And she said, not my phone. So how are the kids kind of reacting? And I know it's mixed. And then I have a second question too.
I think the mixed feelings were more the initial feelings when the policy was first put in place 18 months ago. Most of the kids will reluctantly admit it's a nice break. And I don't think they miss it during the day anymore because it's become part of our culture, it's become part of the norm. And if you are somebody that's trying to break against that norm, you're the oddity now. And I think it's a complete culture shift in our school where if you weren't looking at your phone before, you were the oddity. Now, if you're the one trying to sneak it, you are. And so that's been a nice paradigm shift in our district. They're kids, and they don't like admitting that adults are right to begin with. But most of them, if they're being honest with you, will admit that it's a nice break in the day.
Before you go on, I just wanted to say we have a no cell phone policy on the child adolescent psychiatry unit. And over the last couple of years, we have moved forward to recommending to parents that they have a no cell phone policy for a period of time while the adolescent is coming home. And without fail, in the discharge meeting, the adolescent always tells the parent they're not going to survive without their cell phone. And when the parent says the team is making a recommendation that you need to be offline for a little while, sometimes the kids say, you're right, it's not healthy for me. I know it's not healthy, and since you're telling me I can't do it, I guess I can't do it. But if you give them the opportunity, they will always choose to be back engaged, which is why I thought the name of this panel was so interesting, Unplugged. They won't unplug themselves, but if somebody unplugs them, they will talk, look people in the eye, play, create, develop, change, grow, all of the things. But they can't do it for themselves. And they always ask the same question, how soon can I get my online privileges back?
Yeah, I just have a follow-up. I'm cheating because I work with Dr. Stewart, but Dr. Stewart, I'm wondering if the rest of the panel, when we restrict things for a period of time and then we are unable to follow our parents home, and I'm just wondering, for all of you, if you can speak to the feedback you've received in regard to the increase in challenging behaviors at home. And Dr. Stewart, I'm wondering if you could also speak to what we have seen and the importance of that collaboration, that team collaboration to include the family. I'm wondering, for those that have been involved in this work, I hear there are efforts being made for extracurricular activities or social activities outside of the school day. And I'm wondering what efforts we have made to collaborate with our parents, our caretakers, in reinforcing some of these restrictions and limitations to provide consistency outside of the school day. I'm hearing themes that decisions are easier to maintain when the parents are not the ones making those recommendations and enforcing those, but how are we supporting our families with the transition from school to home? I also work in psychiatry and inpatient units, and I know that with our families and work with, that is a concern and a fear, and we do see that has resulted in challenging behaviors and an increase in mental health crises. So just wanted to open that kind of follow-up question to the
the adolescent in the room, but she's gone. So I'm always curious from the adolescents, and I generally take just like the governor, I always tell the parents it was our decision. I tell the kids it was our decision. We made the recommendation, not your parents. And so you don't be mad at them, be mad at us before you go home. But I do think that Rayanne's point, and she's an incredible social worker on the child adolescent unit, but I do think her point is well taken, is that the parents are so fatigued by this constant battle of trying to get their kids to talk to them and get off their devices, that they're begging and pleading for somebody else to tell them how to do it, what to do. I will do anything as long as you get my kid back to me, and I can't do it alone. So I think those are really hard conversations, because the parents are saying, you don't understand what it's like when we are at home. We're all in separate chairs and separate couches, all on our devices, and I don't know how to fix it, because it's part of the culture that we have to be available all of the time.
Okay. Yeah, so this is very much some of the work we do, and it's really giving parents the tools to, until the law really catches up with the moment and can protect us in ways. I mean, there still has to be, even if the internet is safe, accessing it and not, all of this, you kind of highlighted this. The child brain needs that one-on-one connection. We need to have those in-person moments. That's how the learning happens. That's how life learning happens. Letting a kid walk to the store on their own, all of those things are in real life. Like, to borrow a term, these things have to be happening in real life. And yes, parents are fatigued. They are so tired. So much has been demanded. Caregivers too, teachers too. I mean, I think everyone in this room is probably exhausted. We've been sold this idea that if you let your kids be online, it's kind of like a little babysitter. It's a little break for everyone. I'm going to go make dinner. And I think the real truth is, if parents actually knew, to your earlier point, if the parents actually knew who they were leaving their children alone with in the room, right? So you would never let your kids hang out with, total strangers, anywhere. You wouldn't just be like, yeah, go, that guy looks fine. Go hang out with him. You would never do that. You would never let your child just, have unfettered access to this. If you actually knew what was happening, I think if most parents actually knew the real harms, the real dangers, the things that you were talking about that you're having to tell parents. And that's part of the work we do, and it's part of the work that all of these organizations do. And again, parents are tired, so we are trying to make this as easy as possible, as easily digestible. We try to really get this information out there, and not just the scary stuff, because that is scary, but we do find that really gets people hooked. We're all trying to keep our kids safe. But also, how do you get away from that? How do you have conversations with other parents? What's the play date after school gonna be? Oh, they're gonna play Fortnite for 2 hours? Are you gonna be in the room? Those sorts of conversations are things we have to start having. Why are you having a play date? Why would you have a play date with another kid if you're just gonna let them play video games? That's not a play date. That's just two kids on the internet in the same room. So we are working on having a culture shift, is what I would say. We are really trying to empower parents and caregivers and families and everybody who's involved in children's lives. And again, to your point, there are lots of beautiful things happening online. There's great tech. There are after-school programs where kids are coding. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about throwing a device with just the entire internet on it with no restrictions at a child who's 5. That's, we can't be doing that. And I think a lot of parents it's a lack of awareness and a lack of what's really going on, to your point. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but we're working on it. We're working really hard.
Devices in supervised places in the home. That is really important. Families being on devices together and talking while they're using the devices. Narrating it, explaining it, learning it together. Devices and extra time on devices being incentivized so that we're not punishing by taking the device, but rather building the tolerance of not having it but earning it for extra time.
definitely using the devices in the home for all of the amazing things that they can do, but making that a familial norm, like deciding what the culture is going to be. Is there going to be no devices at dinner and at the table? Is there going to be no devices after 8 o'clock at night? Is there going to be no devices before school? What are the rules of the home? And having those dialogues with the family and giving them permission to make those decisions with their children, without their children, whatever needs to happen, and then following it consistently to shape the culture and values of the house.
Oh, and one thing, we are starting earlier. What's really encouraging about the work we're doing is we're seeing more parents of younger children come in and ask for this information. The information is getting out there, parents are understanding what it is, and I think that's really given me hope. I hate it because I don't like to see parents of young children coming in, but it is giving me hope because it feels like we're finally getting a little bit ahead of the problem and getting that education out there so they can make more informed choices.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. We have time for,
Yeah.
I think we'll take one more question.
She's gonna,
It's the team.
yes, she is. She's gonna speak.
Hi, I'm Julia Ryan, 7th grade student at Paradise Central Middle School. I'm happy to be a student leader to be a helpful role model to help my peers make this transition. Thank you for helping to make our environment at school more safe. I have went to many soccer camps. I'm a part of teams, and I remember when my friends first told me about this soccer camp that I wasn't allowed to have my phone, and when I got back in the car, I'm like, I don't need that phone. I could just talk to my parents and see the world, like outside in the woods. It was amazing, and that really helped me disconnect from that. So if there's anything specific I can do to help in my school, I would love to do it.
Do you think a lot of children feel the way you do, and they would like someone to take the phone away from them? Okay, parents, you gotta respond.
Is it Julia?
Julia. Yeah, so on my list that I didn't say already, but at the very bottom of my list is to remind everybody that teenagers learn best from other teenagers. And so what we know about learning in the adolescent brain is that to be in community, you have to embed peers that are willing to speak up. And that's really hard to do, but it's really important that you carry your message that you're okay, even without being plugged in all of the time. And I so appreciate that hard work because it's not something that teen culture is cool with, but good on the parents. Yay! And also good on you, Julia, for being willing to do all of the hardest things. Yeah.
So Maria, I just wanted to ask, what can we do to help make Bell to Bell pass?
One, tell all your friends, have one friend tell one friend tell one friend. Was that like shampoo commercial we used to have 100 million years ago? I think the other piece that is really important, it's important today, federal and state. To the extent that you call your legislatures, do not write them. We get letters all the time. We just add up how many people have come across on that topic, but call them. Because it's easier to send a standard letter than it is to call. And so when someone calls, they feel that there's more passion behind it. So flood them with phone calls.
Yep.
Jones was supposed to be here, he signed up,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just to reiterate that, we're talking about state lawmakers, so like
Mm-hmm.
a couple of, some phone calls really move the moment. And even with federal lawmakers, that's the case. I remember one of the most powerful things I heard was from a congressman, how do we make an impact? And he was like, if we get 25 phone calls, we start to meet about something. If we get 100, we have to have a whole team meeting. If we get 300, we're gonna do something. Like that's, and so it's really, everyone has this kind of mindset that we can't do anything. All of us in this room have networks. One of the nice things about social media and being connected is you can get in touch with people very easily. We have listservs, we have all these great tools where we can actually, if you're gonna call a lawmaker, how easy it is to look up the lawmaker's number and then say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna put sample text on my listserv and get 10 more people to do this. I'm gonna send it in an email, I'm gonna share this out. That's how we move this.
Yeah.
Yep, someone just asked if I can email, so, like our assemblymen, our state senators, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Everyone.
And it takes 2 minutes, because it's a staffer who says, what are you calling about? Where are you from? Where do you live? That sort of thing. What's your issue?
And then, sorry.
Call them every day if you want.
And we will, there's going to be a lot of bills coming out. I know our group, and I will work with, we're going to be working across the state to really assemble coalitions, to have lobbying days, to meet with lawmakers in Albany. And I think eventually, hopefully, we'll have some stuff in DC. For COSA, we had a lot of people come down to try and lobby. It was very difficult, but, so we have those moments. So sign up. I think, you're doing amazing work. And so, yes, so I think these are moments that we will be able to share out. But actually going and talking to a lawmaker sitting in their office, explaining to them, this is what we want, this is what we matter. Because a lot of when we hear from lawmakers across the country, they're afraid of parents. They're afraid of parents. They're afraid of parents. Everybody's afraid of parents. So we're the parents. We need to let lawmakers know that they have our support, that we support these things, that we are not going to fly off the handle, that we want what's best for our kids, and we know they do too.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Yes.
Would like, apologize, I'm right late, but I was in another talk, and I have a simple question. I am a mother with 2 boys, and I have a question for the parents. Why the parents give a cell phone to their kids? I don't understand, because we don't give. We know about the nature of the mind and how these cell phones are created to trap the mind. Maybe the parents, we are ignorant about how our mind is working, or why we want to entertain our teenagers developing in their brains. It is a part I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I don't try to say we are ignorant, but I am ignorant because I don't understand why the youth have a lot of problems with cell phones and why the parents are paying for this service. We don't want to, and we cannot pay for that, and we don't want. We are trying to know about how our mind is working, how our movement of the thought is working in ourselves to give our sons differently. And we are trying to relearn like parents, like human beings. So it is a part I don't understand why you are available to pay for this another extra income, extra bill in their house. Please explain me. I'm so sorry. And that's it. Thank you.
I think she just hit the nail on the head. It's a $64,000 question. Why do we do that as parents? Kylie, why do we do that as parents? I don't know. Anyway, who's the mom in here? Why do we do that?
As someone wearing the mama t-shirt, I can't answer this question because I have this argument with my son a lot. He's in 6th grade. But what I hear from other parents is peer pressure.
Yeah.
That the kids, I had a mom who had her 12-year-old daughter had a PowerPoint presentation. Now, that PowerPoint presentation was on point, gorgeous. She was very impressed with the PR skills and doing it. She gave her a nice little treat for that, but it was still a hard pass. And I think for parents that are holding the line, because it does feel like you're holding a line, because your kids are coming home, and our children, the most reliable narrators, not always. There were lots of rumors flying around. We don't always get the total story. I think having surveys like this and really trying to kind of establish some community norms helps. But I don't have an answer for you as to why, knowing what I know, I absolutely am scared to pieces about giving my child a phone. Because I know I can't control it. I know that I lack the education and the ability to actually lock it down in the ways that I want to. this idea, like, I think when we do cross over into that place, and you're right, it's an added expense. It's money that you could be spending on summer camp that doesn't have cell phones. I mean, if you actually take all of those bills and put them together, that's at least a week at summer camp, anyway, so that's what I would say.
I think it's a little more complex than that, though. Peer pressure is there. However, my wife and I, who happens to be with me tonight, we noticed, we tried to take the approach that, no, we're not getting kids the phones until later in their life. But we started to realize that they were being left out of things socially because all of the plans were being made on social media and through text messages. So they wouldn't be invited to this, and they weren't aware of this thing. And we're like, oh my God, they're isolated because they don't have a phone. And ironically now, because they have phones, they're isolated on social media. So it wasn't just about peer pressure. It was like the practicality of that's how kids made arrangements at that point in their lives.
I will add that for me, peer pressure was it. I mean, my daughter wrote a long note. I swore she was going to become a lawyer. She hasn't done it.
Still time.
No, she's an art therapist. She went the other direction.
Good.
But it also is a safety issue for some folks, right? I was at work, and I wanted to make sure I knew where my kids were. I wanted to make sure they were getting home. I wanted to know if the bus was late. Lots of reasons. For my youngest, because the 17-year-old, obviously the level of apps and access has gotten big, just much more dangerous. I used to shut it off at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, the phone would turn off. You have the parental control to do that. And I also, for a long time, had to approve all of his apps at the point in which he was like, Mom, I think I'm old enough now. But it literally would ping on my phone, and I would say to him, okay, I'll approve it. Or I would sit down and have a conversation and say, tell me why you need that app. So for many years, I approved everything he had on his phone.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.